Derrick Henry is not like anybody else.
What does football mean to you?
I mean, I love it. It means everything to me. My dream since I was a little boy.
Give it to Henry, right side, looking for a gap. He's got it, he's in!
Some of the best running backs in history have been carried by having one major trait: vision, elusiveness, break tackle ability, breakaway speed. Derrick has them all.
Right up the middle, big hole, touchdown for the King! To the 5, to the end zone!
He's arguably been the best back in football for half a decade, and now he's only 2 touchdowns away from being third all time, behind Hall of Famers Emmitt Smith and LaDainian Tomlinson. But coming out of college, even with all of those traits, people still question his ability to play the position at the next level. Many people doubted who Derrick Henry could be in the NFL. A lot of scouts thought that he was a freaky athlete, but thought that he ran too high in order to be an effective back. But they should have known since his high school tape that he was destined for greatness. He was so insane at an early age that his middle school had to create a rule specifically for him. You're not gonna guess what it was called. It was called the Derrick Henry rule, but the point still stands. He was insane. Anytime his team went up by 21 points, Henry had to come out of the game because he was so dominant that continuing to play him felt unfair to the other teams. That's the level of player we're talking about here. In high school, he rushed for over 4,200 yards and 55 touchdowns as a senior, and he broke the national career rushing record that had stood for almost 60 years. The previous record was set by Texas prep legend Ken Hall in 1953, and Derrick passed him in a playoff game against Perry Taylor County. That game alone, Derrick had 58 catches for 482 yards and 6 touchdowns. Earlier that same season, he went for 510 yards in a game, setting a state record. He finished his high school career with over 12,000 career rushing yards, and by the time he was done, every college program in the country was recruiting him. Nick Saban in Alabama won that battle, getting his commitment early in his senior year. He chose Alabama, and his dominance continued at the next level without missing a beat. As a freshman, he showed flashes with limited touches, averaging 10 yards per carry when he got the chance. As a sophomore, his workload increased with splitting carries with TJ Yeldon. He rushed for over 900 yards that season. Then Yeldon went off to the NFL, and Derrick became the featured back that Alabama needed. Offensive coordinator Lane Kiffin was ready to feed him, and Henry responded with a junior season that was one of the most dominant in college football history. He ran for over 2,200 yards and 28 touchdowns in 15 games on his way to winning the Heisman Trophy, beating out Stanford's Chris McCaffrey for the award. When you look at what Henry did that season, it wasn't just the volume, it was the way he did it. Physically running over defenders, carrying them into the end zone, doing things that looked impossible for someone his size. At the combine, he ran a 4.54 40 at 247 pounds. He was basically the size of a linebacker, but running like a track athlete. He posted a 30.5-inch vertical jump. Teams knew they were looking at a physical specimen unlike anything else in the draft. They just weren't sure his style would translate to the NFL, or whether a running back who ran the way Henry did, uptight and not super agile, could survive in a league that was increasingly moving towards shiftier players. When Derrick Henry came out of Alabama, scouts still had their doubts, even though they loved his size, speed, and production, and he had just won the Heisman, for God's sake. The problem was that something about the way he ran didn't fit what teams wanted in the modern NFL, where he was labeled too uptight, too stiff, and not agile enough to make people miss in the open field. The league was moving towards smaller, shiftier backs who could catch out of the backfield and create mismatches in the passing game. And Henry was basically a wrecking ball with legs, which wasn't the profile teams were really looking for at that time. Ezekiel Elliott went 4th overall in the 2016 draft, while Christian McCaffrey went 8th overall, and players like Alvin Kamara and Saquon Barkley were coming into the league with reputations as versatile dual-threat backs who could do everything. Henry? He fell to the 2nd round, 45th overall, when the Tennessee Titans traded up to get him, and some analysts thought it was a reach, while others said that the Titans were just wasting their pick on a back whose style wouldn't fit in the modern game. The scouting report said he was too north-south and was dependent on just running over people instead of around them. And people thought how tall he stood while running was considered a flaw that would get exposed once the league had caught up to him. Also, that most teams wouldn't want a back you needed to give the ball 25 to 30 times a game to anymore. Nobody could have predicted he'd become one of the most dominant running backs in NFL history. The Titans drafted Henry in 2016, but there was an immediate problem. They already had DeMarco Murray, who was the NFL's rushing leading leader just 2 seasons earlier when he ran for over 1,800 yards with the Cowboys. Derrick sat behind him as a rookie, getting limited touches in a timeshare that was never going to give him the volume he needed to show what he could do. He finished his first season with only 490 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. The role never expanded the way people expected, and when 2017 rolled around, Henry was still splitting carries with Murray in an offense that wanted to keep both backs fresh. He wasn't the featured back, and it looked like the scouts' doubts about him might have been right. Through the first 7 weeks of that season, he had only found the end zone twice, and he was only averaging 3.25 yards per carry. The Titans were losing games, and Henry was struggling to get anything going. There was a real talk that he might not even be in the league much longer. This was the low point, the moment when everything almost fell apart. After a 20-19 loss to the Chargers where Henry had just 33 yards on 12 carries, he was searching for answers. He knew he was playing scared, knew he wasn't running the way that he should, and he also knew that something had to change or his career was going to be over before it really even started. He texted Eddie George, someone he had met when he won the Heisman in 2015, and asked if they could talk. George had been one of the most feared running backs in Titans history, a guy who ran for over 10,000 yards in the league and knew what it took to survive at the highest level. What George told Henry in that conversation was exactly what he needed to hear, and it would change everything about how he approached the game from that moment forward. Eddie didn't sugarcoat anything when they got together. He shot Henry straight, and Derrick said it changed his life forever. Eddie told him he wasn't playing to his potential, that he needed to be more physical and finish runs harder. He needed to make the defense pay for every attempt to tackle him. George looked at Henry and saw a 6'3", 247-pound running back who wasn't using his size the way he should, who was running too timidly instead of imposing his will on every play. His exact words, the ones Henry has repeated countless times since that conversation, were that it was either going to be him or the defense, and it wasn't going to be him. Henry said afterward that it was mind over matter. He stopped waiting for holes to open and started imposing his will on defenders instead. He stopped worrying about what would happen if he got hit and started worrying about what would happen to the defense when they tried to tackle him. The mindset shift was everything. George had played the same position, had dealt with the same doubts. He had to learn how to finish the runs the hard way, and he was passing that knowledge on to Henry at the exact moment he needed it the most. Without that conversation, Derrick might have just been another draft pick who didn't live up to expectations. With it, he became a different player overnight, and the change was immediate. He finished the 2018 season on a tear, rushing for over 625 yards over 5 December games, and scoring 11 touchdowns after that conversation with George. But the moment that really announced his arrival to the entire NFL came against Jacksonville in Week 14. In that game, Henry broke loose for a 99-yard touchdown run that will forever be remembered as one of the greatest runs in NFL history. He threw off defenders with the stiff arm, breaking tackles like they were nothing, and then outran everyone to the end zone, staying in bounds the entire way. Derrick scored 4 touchdowns that game and finished with 238 rushing yards, and the transformation was complete. From that point forward, nobody questioned whether Henry could play. They just hoped they weren't the team standing in his way. But before we get to his peak seasons, if you're enjoying this content, I'd appreciate it if you guys subscribe. It lets YouTube and myself know y'all are enjoying these type of videos. Now let's get back into it. With Mike Vrabel taking over as the head coach in 2019 and DeMarco Murray finally being released, Henry had the opportunity he had been waiting for his entire career. He became the centerpiece of the offense, and he responded with a season that announced him as the best running back in football. He led the NFL in rushing attempts, rushing yards, and rushing touchdowns. He never carried the ball less than 13 times in any game that season, and in most games he got 20 or more carries. When you watched him play, you saw a back who was impossible to tackle in the second half because he wore defenses down physically, beating them up play after play until they just couldn't stop him anymore. He made a second-team All-Pro in his first Pro Bowl. To close the regular season, he had one of the best stretches in league history. 188 rushing yards, 2 TDs, and a dub against the Chiefs. 159 and 2 touchdowns against the Jags, another win. 149 yards and a TD against the Colts. 103 yards and 2 more touchdowns against the Raiders, both W's. Kinda fell off against the Texans the first time with only 86 yards. Then he had 211 yards and 3 TDs to close the season against the Texans, another win. He was an absolute freight train rolling into the playoffs, and then he won Offensive Player of the Month for December. Then he kept going, ending the Pats dynasty once and for all with 182 yards and a touchdown in the wildcard round. Then upsetting the number 1 seeded Ravens with 195 yards and a pass TD for good measure, killing Earl Thomas's Hall of Fame career in just one night. Eventually he got shut down by the Chiefs in the AFC Championship with only 69 yards. Nice. But it was the first time since November 3rd that he had less than 70 rushing yards, over 2 calendar months. He had officially arrived. Then came 2020 and Henry put together one of the greatest running back seasons in NFL history. He became just the 8th player ever to rush for 2,000 yards in a season, doing it on 378 carries, the most in the league that year. He scored 17 touchdowns and earned Offensive Player of the Year honors, becoming the first Titans player to win that award since Earl Campbell did in 1979. He would win Offensive Player of the Month in October. If you thought the stretch to end the final 2 months last year was crazy, starting this November again, he went off for 112 yards and a TD against the Bengals, slowed down to just 68 yards against the Bears, then 103 yards against the Colts, 133 and a touchdown against Baltimore, 178 and 3 TDs against the Colts this time again, 60 yards against Cleveland, 215 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Jags, 147 yards and a touchdown against the Lions, 98 yards versus the Packers. And heading into the final week of the season, he was 223 yards away from breaking 2,000, and a win would also clinch the division, so it seemed like a huge feat. But he made it look easy, with 250 yards and 2 more touchdowns, earning that 2,000 yard marker. When you talk about sustained dominance, this is what it looks like. He put up another 1,000-yard season in 2021 despite missing games after week 9 due to a foot injury that put him on IR. He came back in 2022 and led the NFL in carries again for the 3rd time in 4 years, proving that his body could hold up to any workload even at that age. He turned in his 4th 1,000-yard season, doing that at 28 years old when most backs are already in decline. In 2023, he topped the league in carries once again, and even though his yards decreased slightly, he still scored 12 rushing touchdowns and ran for over 1,100 yards. The Titans went 6-11 that year and hit the reset button, firing coach Mike Vrabel and letting Henry walk. That last game in Tennessee, against the Jags, of course. Henry rushed for 153 yards and a touchdown with a W, because of course he did. The annual Jacksonville beatdowns became a tradition that fans of other teams probably envy. Henry seemed to have his best games for the Jags and the Texans, rushing for over 200 yards against them multiple times, embarrassing defenders with his stiff arms and his pure power. He scored touchdowns against the Jags in pretty much every meeting during this time past 2019. And it got to the point where Jacksonville fans were probably dreaded seeing the schedule come out each year because they knew what was coming. But even though Henry's time in Tennessee was about to be over, his back 9 with the Ravens was about to go crazy.
But before that, we have a quick word from our sponsor over at PrizePicks. The football preseason is officially here, and there's no better place to run your game than PrizePicks, America's #1 sports pick app. We've got star players on new teams and an incredible rookie class ready to take over as we get ready for the biggest football season yet. What I love about PrizePicks is that you don't have to just stick to week action. You can lock in full season picks right now on player projections. I already put together a 3-pick lineup that I'm locked into for the year. I have Justin Jefferson at more than 1,149.5 receiving yards, Jahmyr Gibbs at more than 1,199.5 rush yards, and Derrick Henry at more than 1,249.5 rushing yards as well. And the good news is building your lineup is super easy. You just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, submit your lineup, and follow your progress all year long right inside the app. Plus, PrizePicks is available in all 50 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $150 instantly in lineups if you win your first $5 lineup. Again, that's download the app today and use code CLNS to get $150 instantly in lineups if you win your first $5 lineup. And you know what? I'm going to say that actually one more time. That's $150 instantly in lineups if you win your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, America's #1 sports pick app. Now let's get back into it.
Most running backs at age 30 would be expecting their career to be ending pretty soon, but in March of 2024, Derrick Henry signed with the Baltimore Ravens, and it was a fit that made so much sense, it was kind of surprising it didn't happen sooner. They almost did in 2023, but Eric DeCosta got too scared to go all in for a chip, but you know what, that's neither here nor there. With Lamar Jackson as his quarterback, Henry had something he never had in Tennessee, a partner who commanded attention on every play. The pairing transformed the Ravens' offense in ways that were immediately visible. When you have Lamar Jackson running the option and Henry in the backfield, defenses have to pick their poison. In week 1 against Kansas City, he only had 43 yards, and people started to wonder if maybe Father Time had caught up to him. But then week 2 came, and he had 84 yards against the Raiders. Week 3, 151 yards against the Cowboys. And by week 4 on Sunday Night Football against Buffalo, Henry ran for 199 yards, including a first drive insane touchdown. He would also help lead the Ravens to beat the Steelers with 186 yards and 2 TDs in the wildcard round. He was still the same player, still imposing his will on defenses, at an age when most running backs are either retired or reduced to backup roles on short-term deals. Henry was still putting up 150-yard games and making his highlight reels look insane. The numbers don't even make sense for a back his age, and he just keeps getting away with it. He signed a 2-year, $30 million extension with the Ravens after the 2024 season. Even after a down year for the Ravens last year, he still ran for 1,595 yards and 16 touchdowns. He did have some costly fumbles, but besides that, he was still pretty dominant. When you look at the running backs who came in around the same time as Derrick Henry, the careers diverge in a really interesting way. Christian McCaffrey was built for the modern NFL. He could catch the ball, run routes, and he could line up in the slot and create mismatches against linebackers and safeties. His peak was absolutely incredible, and when healthy, he was as dominant as any back in football. But the injuries piled up over the years. He missed time with various injuries that kept him off the field. And even when he was on the field last year, you could see the toll the game was taking on his body as the season went on. Ezekiel Elliott came into the league as a 4th overall pick in 2016 and was immediately productive with the Cowboys. He was a workhorse who could carry the load 20+ times a game and still look fresh in the 4th quarter. And early in his career, he looked like he would be a perennial all-pro guy for years to come. But the decline came faster than anyone expected for a guy who's supposed to be built for this. By his mid-20s, the wear and tear had started to show in his speed and his ability to break tackles, and the Cowboys had to eventually move on from him, releasing him twice. Saquon had the most comparable attributes with size, speed, power that Derrick Henry had coming out, and scouts absolutely loved him, but his career path was completely different. He would have some insane peaks, but also multiple struggles with the Giants for years, dealing with injuries and a supporting cast that never gave him the help he truly needed to be great. He eventually went to Philadelphia, where he found new life and also rushed for 2,000 yards, while showing the Giants' struggles weren't entirely on him. He's the closest to Henry in total rushing yards, so we'll see how his career goes on in the next few seasons. Even with that, Henry is still one of one. His style was supposed to be a liability in the modern NFL, and instead, it turned out to be exactly what allowed him to dominate into his 30s and keep on writing his story. That gold jacket should be coming pretty soon. Let's talk about where Henry stands historically, because his first ballot Hall of Fame case is stronger than most people realize. He's top 10 all-time in rushing yards already, and depending on how much longer he plays and how productive he remains, he could easily finish in the top 6 or 7 by the end of this season. That alone will put him in rare company, among the greatest players to ever play the position. But it gets even better when you look at the touchdown numbers. He's a few rushing TDs away from the top 3 all-time. When you add up the career totals with the longevity, the durability, the sustained excellence across nearly a decade at the most physically demanding position in football, his case becomes overwhelming. Henry has done things that only 9 players in NFL history have ever done, rushing for 2,000 yards. And he did it while playing more games and taking more carries than most guys on that list. He has multiple seasons over 1,500 yards. He has an Offensive Player of the Year award. And he has the kind of body of work that front offices and scouts can point to without hesitation that say, this is the first ballot. Running backs have shorter careers than any other position because of the punishment they take. Now with Lamar Jackson by his side and a Ravens team that knows exactly what they have, King Henry still has plenty left to give. Proving everyone wrong who said he was either too old, too one-dimensional, or too stiff to keep playing at a high level. It turns out, he was just too good. So there you have it. Watch this next video if you haven't already and subscribe if you're new. Thanks for watching.